Stephanie, I'm very grateful that you spend the time, and probably you have been speaking about this subject many times to many media, but it's very important that we have you.
Yes, well, I appreciate it. I try to do as much as I can. It gets it gets exhausting, but I feel the message is so important that it's necessary.
Yes, I would like to go quickly through some questions about glyphosate. And I know that consumers, readers, and viewers have a limited concentration span. So the first question is, how long have you been dealing with glyphosate, and how long have you been doing the research about this? And what has brought you to the conclusion that it may cause cancer?
Right. Well, so I started by trying to figure out autism, actually. I was very concerned about autism in the United States, and I was looking at various possibilities that could be causing the autism epidemic that we face. And it took me 5 years of searching before I finally came upon glyphosate. I hadn't considered it at all. But I happened to be at a conference where Professor Don Huber gave a 2-hour presentation. I didn't know what glyphosate was at the time. This was 2012. Of course, I knew what Roundup was, and I had never used it because I've always been suspicious of toxic chemicals. But he laid out the foundations of how glyphosate is causing many human diseases, and he himself was extremely concerned about it. He had been, researching plants, plant physiology, plant pathology for his entire career, professor at Purdue University. So I trusted what he said, and he really talked about the gut microbiome and the disruption of it. So this really, it hit home for me because I knew that autistic kids had, problems with the gut. And I went away from that talk convinced that I had found my answer. And I still believe that I think it is the cause, the primary cause, not the only cause, but the primary cause of the autism epidemic. And then I found out that it causes so many other diseases as well, and that it can be the main source that can explain the epidemic we're seeing in this country with a huge number of different diseases. And of course, cancer rates, we did a war on cancer back in, way back when, like 40 years ago, we launched this quote unquote war on cancer. And we're losing that war, in this country, in the United States. We just have increasing rates of all kinds of cancers, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in particular is one that where people have been winning on lawsuits against glyphosate. And you probably have heard about that.
Yes.
Yeah, so the people who were using exclusively glyphosate and were very obviously exposed to it and weren't exposed to other things, were getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at a young age. And that's a blood cancer, the lymphocytes, which is the white blood cells. So I've just really read, tons of literature. I really started right from 2012. When I heard that lecture, I went back and started reading everything I could about glyphosate. And the more I read, the more concerned I got. And cancer is, the result of oxidative damage to, it starts with kind of cells being exposed to oxidizing agents. And glyphosate has been shown in multiple studies to cause oxidizing effects in the liver, for example. So liver cancer, kidney cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, pancreatic cancer is going up exactly in step with glyphosate usage, and also thyroid cancer. And glyphosate has been shown to disrupt thyroid hormone regulation in many ways in several papers. So it really hits the endocrine system very hard. And in the liver, it causes a lot of liver damage in particular, because the liver is the organ that's trying to deal with toxic chemicals. So it gets a real exposure, really high level of exposure to glyphosate. And it causes this oxidative damage, which then damages the DNA, in particular the mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondria are the the organelles within the cells that produce energy, ATP, very, very important for the cells to function. And when they get exposed to oxidative damage, which has been shown in multiple studies of glyphosate that they do, then that causes DNA mutations in the mitochondria, which then leads to cancer. And also glyphosate goes into the lymph system, gets into the bone marrow. Studies have shown that it accumulates in the bone marrow. And that's where the lymphocytes, the white blood cells are born, from the stem cells that come out of the bone marrow. So those stem cells in the bone marrow are being exposed to glyphosate before they even launch and before they become lymphocytes. And then eventually you get these non-Hodgkin lymphoma types of cancers and leukemia and those kinds of blood cancers. But so it's, many different cancers. The pancreas, of course, is also hard hit because it's right there with the liver. And so in the kidneys, there's studies that have shown alarming increases in kidney cancer among people who work in the sugarcane industry in Central America. There's young men in their 40s that are dying in record numbers from kidney cancer. Or kidney disease, I should say, not kidney cancer, but kidney disease, that are being exposed to glyphosate because they spray the sugarcane with glyphosate just before the harvest, and then they go in and harvest it. And so they're very much exposed to that glyphosate during the harvest season, and it's causing their kidneys to fail.
Okay, but cancer is not the only effect of overusing and consuming glyphosate. There are also scientists who say that it is a very serious hormone disruptor. Is there any literature on this? Any research?
There's a great deal of literature. In fact, there's a recent paper within the last year that did a review. And that paper has, all these different references, hundreds of references in that paper that show evidence of glyphosate causing various endocrine problems. And so one thing is it's causing birth defects. And in fact, I co-authored a paper where we went through and looked at the statistics on, that's just one thing I do, is looking at statistics on trends of disease in America, in the United States, comparing it to the rise in glyphosate. And we found very strong statistical significance correlation between a lot of different problems in reproduction. And things like hypospadia, which is having penises where the urine comes out too short, and even just disruption of the genetic, of the sexual development, disruption of that system, the endocrine system involved with sexual development. Thyroid hormone I mentioned earlier, it really, lots of studies have shown, like when you expose a pregnant rat to glyphosate, then its offspring have a disrupted thyroid system. The thyroid regulatory system gets disrupted. Males become hypothyroid. In fact, if a mother has hypothyroidism, then she has a high chance of producing an autistic child. And so if glyphosate is causing the hypothyroidism in the mother, that's going to lead to autism. That's another path towards, one of the many paths towards autism. There's aromatase is an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen, and that enzyme has been shown to be blocked by glyphosate. And so that's going to cause, again, an endocrine disruption in the sex balance of the sex hormones. Too much estrogen, too little testosterone is something that's seen in studies. There's incredible studies that have shown very low dose glyphosate exposure. These are recent studies within the last couple of years, several of them. Very low dose exposure of a pregnant rat to glyphosate at levels that the pregnant rat seems to be fine. There's like no evidence of harm. And then her offspring also seem to be fine until they start to produce their own offspring. And you get into the second and third generation. So this is epigenetic effects that disrupted the germ cells in the embryo, affecting the second generation and the third generation. And things got worse and worse. So by the time of the third generation, you saw all kinds of problems, various health problems, as well as reproductive issues, and shortened pregnancy, lower numbers of offspring and smaller babies, and then disruption of the health of those offspring. So quite interesting that its effects are long-term, and they're subtle, and they show up later. So that's actually a very, very dangerous situation like that, because we're probably going to see increasing rates of developmental problems, and of course, including infertility. That's another one that's going up dramatically in this country. So many people now have to seek help to have a child. There's a big industry of infertility clinics, and studies on sperm, sperm in vitro studies on sperm have confirmed that very low doses of glyphosate cause immobility. They cause the sperm to be slow, so they can't swim very well, and causes a reduced number of sperm. So it affects the sperm very seriously. And again, that's part of this whole endocrine system. It affects the pancreas, the thyroid, the adrenal glands, the reproductive organs, the gonads, all of those organs, and the thyroid, the pituitary gland, and even the thymus. The thymus is a gland that's very important early in life. And in the study that I mentioned about the problems with children and reproductive issues, we looked at animals that had been exposed to glyphosate, a deer that had incredibly damaged thymus gland. And that's the gland where the immune system matures. And so when the thymus gland is damaged, then you have immune problems. And so I think immune deficiency is a key feature. I think glyphosate is causing an epidemic in deficiency in innate immunity, which is one of the reasons I believe why the United States is having trouble controlling COVID-19, because people have a damaged immune system from the exposure to glyphosate.
So there is no safe dose of glyphosate when you say that the farmers are exposed to glyphosate when they are using Roundup, for example. And they might be afraid that they are too much exposed, but then you say that even the small dose of glyphosate is reacting with our body, with our endocrine system, and it looks like it is a multi-system, let's say, enemy, because it also, in your findings, you also found research on non-fatty liver disease. So how this can be that the one toxin is aggressive to so many organs?
I know, that's quite remarkable, isn't it? And this is what has caused me to be fascinated with this chemical, is how could one chemical be so damaging? And that's one of the criticisms of my work, is that, Nancy Swanson has collaborated with me on a number of papers, and she was the one who first started looking at correlations with disease. And fatty liver disease was one of the ones she identified, but she had a huge list of diseases: autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, diabetes, obesity, liver disease, kidney disease, and then these various cancers that I mentioned: pancreatic cancer and thyroid cancer, and then reproductive issues. I mean, there's just such a huge list of things that are going up exactly in step with glyphosate. And people say, well, one chemical couldn't cause so many things. And then they say correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, So those, you could consider those facts, but the fact is that one chemical can cause so many things if its mechanism of toxicity is really unique and diabolical. And this is what I believe with glyphosate. And in fact, I've written a book, which is going to come out in June 24th of this year, called Toxic Legacy. And then it's how the weed killer glyphosate is destroying our health and the environment. So you can watch for that book. But in there, I explain my understanding of how glyphosate is so toxic. And the reason that I believe is the case is that it is acting as an analog of one of the amino acids, actually the smallest amino acid, which is glycine. So it's called glyphosate because it is a glycine molecule. The gly is from glycine. And then the phosate is for its other piece. So it has an extra thing stuck on the nitrogen atom of the glycine molecule that is called a methylphosphonate. So that's how they get its name. Glyphosate is indicating the phosphonate part. And that methylphosphonate sticking onto the nitrogen atom makes it behave very, very differently from glycine, but it doesn't prevent it from slipping into a protein when it's being assembled as an imposter. So it shows up where glycine should go. I feel very confident that this is happening because the evidence is overwhelming. And I write a lot about it in my book. Complicated science, but it's astonishing, and it's diabolical, insidious. So you don't get bowled over when you get exposed to these small doses of glyphosate from your food, like in oats and in wheat. You don't feel sick, so you think it's fine, but it's basically building these diabolical proteins throughout your body. And those proteins misbehave. They don't do their job, and they can do other things like misfold and cause Alzheimer's. So I think glyphosate getting into the amyloid beta in the brain is what is a cause of is causing the epidemic in Alzheimer's that we're seeing, and probably also connected to autism and other neurological diseases. It definitely has been shown in multiple studies to cause what's called glutamate excitotoxicity. It ends up overstimulating receptors that respond to glutamate. Glutamate is a neurotoxin if there's too much, but it's a critical it's a critical molecule for controlling neural activity. So it's important to have glutamate, but when you have too much, it ends up killing the neurons. And so I think and there's been lots of evidence of it causing neuroexcitotoxicity in rat studies. There's been multiple studies that have shown that it harms the fetal brain during development. And that I think is a very strong link to autism.
So autism, Alzheimer and Parkinson diseases, or thyroid, it's not accidental. It's not accidental in the last 2 decades.
Right. They're all going up. And amyloid ALS is one that I wrote about a whole paper about together with Greg Nye. So I collaborated with Greg Nye to write a paper on ALS, which is, I don't know, I've forgotten what it stands for. It's something lateral sclerosis. It's a very serious neurological disease that leaves you paralyzed. It's really horrible. And all of these neurological diseases are, I think, being glyphosate's contributing. We have other chemicals that cause these problems as well, of course, because we're pretty much a chemical nation, especially the United States. I think we're very much too casual about the chemicals that we use on our food. And it's really causing a huge health problem. The United States has by far the most expensive healthcare system in the world. And I think a primary reason is because we're sick. We have many more chronic diseases. We have a huge obesity problem, diabetes, and the liver disease, of course, is very striking. The glyphosate, there have been studies, again, recent studies. So a lot of new studies are coming out. I'm quite excited about that. They're hard to keep up with. I get oh my God, another paper I got to read. So it's quite exciting. But the liver is quite striking because there was a new study that showed very low levels of glyphosate exposure in rats caused fatty liver disease. And then there was another study on humans where they actually looked at people who had fatty liver disease and compared and measured glyphosate in the urine. And they compared them to people who didn't and found statistically significant differences with more glyphosate associated with the disease. And even between the lesser disease and the more advanced disease, there was a statistically significant difference between the amount of glyphosate in the urine in those two populations. So you see the evidence in humans, you see the evidence in rats, and I feel like I can explain how that works. And it's been shown that glyphosate suppresses succinate dehydrogenase, which is an absolutely critical enzyme in the mitochondria. It's involved both with the citric acid cycle and with oxidative phosphorylation. It's the only enzyme, I think, that is involved with both of those very essential functions in the mitochondria. And glyphosate suppresses it. So that is a serious problem with respect to destroying the mitochondria, preventing them from being able to make enough ATP, which is the energy. Then if the cell doesn't have enough energy, then it's really in trouble. And then meanwhile, there's also this oxidative damage. It causes the mitochondria to release oxidizing agents that then damage the tissues. And then the fatty liver comes about because the mitochondria are, the citric acid cycle is disturbed. And then you can't metabolize fats. And so the fats build up in the liver. It's quite clear to me how it would cause this. And I can connect it also to glycine substitution in succinate dehydrogenase and also in another enzyme called PEPCK, phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase, which is crucial for being able to metabolize fats. When you have a broken PEPCK, you have fatty liver disease. It causes that. And PEPCK is very much similar to the enzyme that glyphosate famously disrupts in the plants, which is it has a very similar property that it binds this PEP at a site where there's a highly conserved glycine residue. So it's very much a parallel with what's going on with the enzyme EPSP synthase, that is the one that is well known to be a critical enzyme in plants that gets affected and kills the plants.
It looks like we are not aware of what we are generally eating and that we are eating toxin every day. that can cause serious diseases, which then doctors, when they discover that this is a kind of a disease, they try to make some therapies. But I know only 3 doctors, maybe 4, who recommend to patients to stop eating conventional food and stop eating fast food, and, for example, go to a healthy diet, meaning ecological food. This is a very, very seldom to meet a doctor who will mention to stop, let's say, attacking our cells and our body with something like a toxin from food, because it's not only glyphosate that is damaging our cells.
Right.
So why is it so rare that organic food is recommended?
I wish I understood that. I actually do not. I just cannot imagine why doctors haven't realized by now, especially in this country where it's so obvious that people are sick, why they haven't. And it's true here too. We have naturopaths and they are growing in number, and the naturopaths are very much aware. Many of them, I think, recommend going organic and not eating fast food. But the what I call the mainstream doctors just seem to be completely oblivious to the idea that your diet might affect your health. I just can't fathom why that is, actually, because it's so clear to me. And you know, people that I have known that have switched to organic diet and cured their problems, it's really quite remarkable how much you can improve your health simply by choosing certified organic when you shop and eating whole foods, you know, whole foods, certified organic. If you just make that one change in your lifestyle, and the extra money you spend is peanuts compared to what you gain in the money that you don't spend on your health, and also, of course, in the way you feel. You know, you feel so much more happier and less anxious. And I mean, it's just so many great things about eating a certified organic whole foods diet that there's absolutely no reason why everyone shouldn't strive to do that. And in this country, actually the demand for organic food is going up over time, exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. The industry likes to go, ha, 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 organic food is causing, you know, all these diseases. They can't seem to understand that, of course, you're going to eat more organic if there's more poison, right? More people are going to realize, more people are going to switch. So it makes perfect sense to me that it correlates. And I find it laughable that they use that as an example to discredit the idea that, you know, it might be that correlation is causation. So that's quite funny.
I am wondering if people are feeling maybe they are neglecting, because I meet a lot of people and they just neglect sometimes the issue of organic food, or switching at least to 80% of organic food. Mm-hmm. And they seem to think that, okay, I have no serious problem right now. Right. And probably I am very strong and immune to all the toxins you are talking about. And they wait. They think they have time to still eat this conventional food or fast food. So they think they have the right to toxify their body still for some time before something happens. So is there any person or people who are really immune to glyphosate? Or is any system in the body that is, let's say, can defend themselves against glyphosate? What is your opinion?
Yeah, my opinion is that you certainly shouldn't trust your body to know how to deal with this chemical because it's so monstrous. But there certainly is the case that some people are more sensitive than others. And I think sometimes that can just have to do with a genetic defect. You may have a slight genetic defect in a particular enzyme that is also affected by glyphosate. And so you get there faster. You get to the point where there's trouble faster on that particular enzyme. So I can see how some people might be, in some sense, more robust against exposures, but I certainly wouldn't trust that. I can see also how people can feel, well, I feel fine now and I've been eating this food, so why don't I just keep doing it? Because you don't realize you're sick until you're sick, you know, and then it's a lot harder to get back to where you were once you have a health problem. And so that's very dangerous, because if people feel, and of course, it's so easy to get the processed food, you know, go in and buy a little soy protein bar as a snack. It's just easy food to eat, very little effort involved, and cheap too. So those are all appealing things to people, and tasty too, because they put in all these, you know, taste enhancers. So, you know, they can be delicious even though they're toxic, which is really unfortunate. Mm-hmm. So I do think there are some things that might help. There's certainly some people that are promoting products. One that I like is called Ion Biome. I don't know if it's available there, but in this country, it's produced by someone here in the United States. But the basic ingredient there is fulvic. One of the basic ingredients is fulvic acid. Fulvic acid is a complex organic matter molecule from the soil. And apparently that it's been well known that fulvic acid is capable of binding toxic chemicals and helping to remove them from the gut, so that can help to reduce your danger of being exposed to glyphosate that you're eating, because it can be captured by the fulvic acid that you can just take orally. So that's one thing. As far as one possibility is gut microbes. And I've been wondering whether some people are less sensitive because they happen to harbor gut microbes that can metabolize glyphosate. That's a possibility, I think. And we don't know. I mean, the research hasn't been done to answer that question, but it's possible that some people are lucky that they have certain microbes in their gut that are able to clear glyphosate, actually fully metabolize it, because there are a few microbes that can do that. And some of them, the ones that can do that are problematic. They're problematic health issues because I think because they can clear glyphosate, they thrive compared to others, and they can be pathogenic.
Mm-hmm. So, what kind of changes have you done when you learned about glyphosate, how dangerous it is? Right. What were the steps that you took one by one?
Yeah, mostly it was just switching to certified organic. We started out when we first realized it, we thought, well, when we use up the food, when we replace it, we'll replace it with certified organic. And then after a couple of months, we said, no, we can't eat this food anymore. So we had a purge, and we threw away everything that wasn't certified organic, including the spices, and sort of started over with those products. So we now have when we shop, we won't buy it if it doesn't have a certified organic label. Mm-hmm. We're very strict. And also we eat, whole food. So I think eating a diet that's rich, actually, I think, I don't believe in a vegan diet. I think that meats are good for you, and seafood is good for you. So we eat the full spectrum of foods, but we eat a lot of vegetables. We eat a lot of fresh vegetables. We have a big salad every night, and we make our own salad dressing, and we use, organic vinegar and organic oil, and et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then we have a lot of stir-fried green vegetables. So I really like the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and onions and garlic. So those are all good sources of sulfur. And one thing that I've identified is sulfur deficiency and sulfur mismanagement as being a key contributor to many of these diseases that we face. So we try to get a lot of sulfur in our diet. And then we mostly eat fruits, vegetables, and meats. So go low on the carbohydrates. Don't eat a lot of sweets, and don't eat a lot of processed carbohydrates. So candies and sugars and things like that. Stay away from those things, and stay away from packaged foods like soy protein bars. I think I have never had a soy protein bar in my whole life. I think I was suspicious of them even before I knew about glyphosate, because it just feels like synthetic food. So if it's got a big list of chemicals in its ingredients, don't buy it, is a really good motto. Eating herbs and spices are also really important. So we use a lot of herbs and spices in our cooking. Mm-hmm. And then bone broth is another one that is good, just to get an organic, buy organic, like a whole chicken, for example, and then you can mm-hmm. eat the chicken and then just put the bones in a pot and cook it for a long time and make a bone broth. And so that's also very wholesome. You get a lot of nutrition out of the bones, actually. Mm-hmm. And that gives you also the minerals, because the minerals are also very important. And glyphosate messes up the minerals big time. It binds to the minerals and prevents them from circulating it disrupts the body's natural system for transporting minerals. And I've written an entire paper on manganese, for example. Manganese gets really messed up by glyphosate. And that's one of the reasons, I think, for Parkinson's disease. And then iron transport is disrupted. So iron becomes toxic, but iron becomes both toxic and deficient at the same time in the presence of glyphosate. So what's happening is that the body has developed really sophisticated systems for delivering these minerals. So minerals are, reactive. That's why they're good, because there are certain enzymes that bind to certain minerals, and that's how they work. They need to bind to that mineral to work. But that mineral, in the process of getting to where it needs to go, can become toxic if it isn't escorted properly. So we have all these proteins that specialize in transporting and delivering these minerals, and those proteins get affected by glyphosate. So we end up with a very bad mineral imbalance where minerals are both toxic and deficient. Manganese and iron in particular. Cobalt is extremely deficient. It was a study on cows that showed levels of cobalt. It was 8 different farms, I think, in Denmark, and they looked at all the minerals in the blood, and they found that the levels of cobalt and manganese were below the lower limit of what would be expected. So they were way down. And those are both really important for certain critical enzymes in the body. So I think that, getting a lot of minerals in your diet and staying away from glyphosate is really important in order for your enzymes to be able to function properly.
But you mentioned animals, which are then eaten by people. So it means that if we eat meat, and this meat is coming from conventional farmers, and these cows, pigs and chickens, they eat food which is not only with glyphosate, but also they are GMO, they are genetically modified. This means that we absorb all those toxins which are accumulated in meat because they take the molecules from the plants, which are very unhealthy also for them.
Right. I think so. In fact, it's interesting because we have an epidemic now in meat allergy in this country, in the United States. Many people are becoming sensitive to meat. They can't eat beef and they can't eat pork. And I think that's because of glyphosate in the meat causing a sensitivity to develop. And of course, we have celiac disease. Do you have a problem with celiac disease there? That's gluten intolerance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You have that? Yeah, I mean, we have a huge problem here with huge sections of the grocery store devoted to various gluten-free products because people have become sensitive to gluten. And I wrote another paper on that together with Anthony Samsel, showing how glyphosate can be expected to cause it. And I think glyphosate is the primary cause of the epidemic. Mm-hmm. In fact, it correlates. Gluten intolerance, the rise of celiac disease correlates with the rise of glyphosate usage on wheat, specifically on wheat. It correlates better to the rise on wheat than it does to the rise on corn and soy. In other words, specifically, it really links it to the wheat, which is, of course, makes sense because the wheat has the gluten. But I think that's glyphosate is the reason why people have become sensitive to wheat, and also the reason why they become sensitive to meat, because the animal is exposed to glyphosate. So you have to eat organic, grass-fed, beef and organic chicken. And we can find that here in the United States, that's available on the market. We just went shopping today. We bought organic chicken, beef, and pork. So
I can't wait to see your book, Stephanie. But how, I don't want to take more of your time, but I have still one more question. How is it possible that so many research, so many proven effects of glyphosate on human health and also on animals' health, and still being in use? How is it possible?
I wish I had the answer to that. I just feel so frustrated with my own country because our government is just refusing to acknowledge that this chemical is a problem at all. They don't even bother to test to see. And I should mention that glyphosate has been found by others, not by the United States government because they're not testing, but by organizations and also by the Canadian government. They found high levels of glyphosate in wheat and oats, in garbanzo beans and chickpeas. That's one that I was really surprised by. They had very, very high levels because they're sprayed right before harvest. People think, oh, non-GMO, that's great, I can buy that. No, because some of the highest levels are found in non-GMO products like oats and wheat and barley and garbanzo beans and chickpeas and lentils. All of those products are going to be high in glyphosate in the United States. Mexico, I was really, really pleased. I don't know if you heard, but recently, within the last year, Mexico announced that it was going to phase out glyphosate entirely. And I think by 2024 was the number. And the United States is all upset with them. This is actually making me laugh because our country's like, no, you can't do that. We're pressuring them, that's crazy. Why are you getting rid of glyphosate? And then our country is worried that Mexico is going to stop buying our food as well, because the next step is going to be that they will decide to ban imports of foods that contain evidence of glyphosate. And then we're going to really lose the Mexican market and we're going to be so upset. And I really, really hope that happens because it will help us to wake up. I really like that our next door neighbor is going to pressure us to think about maybe we should do something similar. Because if we don't, I mean, our country is just on its knees with respect to the issues that we have with our health. And you never hear it mentioned anywhere in the news, in the media, the mainstream media, I should say. There certainly are alternative media, people that are speaking up about glyphosate. But as far as the core mainstream media, there's not a peep about it. No, glyphosate is just not a problem at all. We're not at all aware that we should be concerned about this thing. And we have this, incredible rise in autism. And the government doesn't seem to think that's a problem either. And I just do not understand. To be quite frank with you, I don't get it. I just don't get it.
So do you think that people, if they don't want to choose organic food, but they would like to notice a change in their lives, in their health, do you think that the solution is that they will move out from the city and become a farmer?
Well, certainly anyone who can actually grow their own food, I think that's a fantastic solution, to grow your own food organically. It'll probably be cost effective as well. And you can be sure that your food is safe because you grew it yourself. There's even some issues about certified organic, whether there's some fraud or whether someone is selling something as certified organic that isn't. And that would be really frustrating, to spend that extra money and not actually get the value. So yeah, I think that would be fantastic. And of course, the city, it's interesting to think where to live, because everywhere in America, you're not safe. I mean, the country, you're going to have people spraying glyphosate on their fields next door. In the suburbs, you're going to have people using it on their weeds in their yards, right? And in the city, I think there's glyphosate in the air in the city as a consequence of burning biofuels. I'm very concerned about that. It's one thing that I became aware of only in the last year. Correlated with the COVID-19 situation, because we were seeing cities like New York City. When COVID first hit, New York City got hit really hard, overflowing their hospitals with people with severe COVID. And I looked into that, and New York City is a leader in the biofuel industry. And the biofuels, for example, you grow a wheat crop, you spray it with glyphosate, you harvest it, and then you take the stubble that's left over and you stick it on a barge and send it down to New York City and turn the crank in the factory and turn out biofuels that are then fed into the city, for example, biogas into the city, and the biofuel in the automobiles, the ethanol. We have a 10% ethanol in our gasoline in this country. And the ethanol probably contains glyphosate, so I think we're burning glyphosate in our vehicles, and including aviation fuel. I mean, we've been sort of spreading it around. In home heating oil, all of those, there's a biodiesel fuel that goes into diesel vehicles, diesel-run vehicles, and also the home heating oil. So we've got lots of chances for having glyphosate in fuels, the biofuels could easily evaporate into the air before it gets combusted, I suspect.
So when we have it in air, we also have it in the rain, and then in groundwaters, and in rivers and lakes and the seas.
Exactly. And in fact, it's been found in the rain. And in fact, there's an article, a brand new article out of Brazil, I believe, that I came across recently that showed they were shocked at the high levels of glyphosate that they found in the air in the city. So I think it's true. I've been hypothesizing it. And certainly there was a study a few years back, I think out of Kentucky, United States, where they found 86% of the samples of rain had glyphosate in them. So if it's in the rain, it's probably being picked up from the air as the water comes down. So I think it's in the air in the cities. And I think interesting, I looked into air pollution with respect to COVID-19. It's quite interesting, because in both the United States and in Europe, there have been multiple studies that have been published that show that cities that have high nanoparticles in the air have increased risk of death from COVID-19. It's a very good correlation in both the United States and Europe. But on the other hand, in Africa, Nigeria has extremely bad air. They have I think 96% of the population is exposed to air that's got pollution at levels above what the WHO recommends. They have very, very low death from COVID, extremely low. And so they have air pollution, but no death from COVID. So I think the difference is whether the air pollution has glyphosate in it or not. And in Nigeria, they don't use much glyphosate. They use much, much less than we do. They have mostly the small farms that are, maybe not certified organic, but they mostly don't use chemicals. I actually looked into that, and I even have a chapter that I wrote for a book looking specifically at Africa and glyphosate usage. And they're much, much lower on average than we are in their usage across Africa, with the possible exception of South Africa. And South Africa is the African country that has been most hit by COVID. So I think you look at Brazil, the new strains of COVID are showing up out of the UK, out of the Brazil, South Africa, and the United States. And those are all countries that are heavily invested in glyphosate. So I think the glyphosate plus the biofuel industry is really ramping up. And in the United States, the places where the biofuels are being heavily developed are the places that are getting hit the hardest by COVID.
Unless they are not treated with glyphosate, they could be safe.
Exactly. If you did biofuels from organic crops, you'd be probably a good idea, but they're ruining it with the glyphosate, and they're not thinking about it at all. I haven't seen anything on that except for what I've written. I'm the only person who's saying this, but I think it's quite likely to be true.
I once read a hypothesis from a mailing from Professor Don Huber, that there is a link between for deforestation by fires, that it might be caused because the glyphosate usage around the forests by farmers is getting the soil very dry. And by drying out the regions around the forests, it could be connected also with the unexpected fires in California.
I totally agree. And in fact, I'm quite interested in that. Even, in fact, Western Canada, which usually doesn't have a problem with forest fires because they're up north, and they're becoming increasing problems with forest fires, but they use a lot of glyphosate in the forest itself. The paper industry, the forest industry uses a lot of glyphosate. And so if you think about, they use glyphosate to kill off the hardwood trees so they can grow conifers, which grow much faster. They can get more paper products out of it. And I think that I suspect a primary reason for the issues we're having with runaway forest fires in the Western United States, Western Canada, Australia, I suspect that all of that may be tied to glyphosate. It's interesting because glyphosate actually disrupts a really important enzyme in plants. It's the most common enzyme in the world, and it's called rubisco. Rubisco. That's a nickname for something, and I won't be able to tell you what it stands for, but rubisco is the name of this enzyme. Very interesting enzyme that is critical for capturing the sunlight and making organic matter. This is the thing that plants can do that animals can't do, to turn to turn inorganic carbon into organic carbon. This is capturing carbon dioxide out of the air and turning it into organic matter, which is crucial, of course, for climate change as well. But that's also going to help the plants to resist burning. That's going to make them much healthier in terms of not being so dried out and able to catch fire so easily. So I really think that glyphosate is a major player in all these forest fires that we're seeing. And no one else is saying that. Almost no one else. Don Huber apparently is, but I think it's correct. And people have shown that he's shown pictures, actually, Don Huber, of two fields of crops that were side by side, and one was organic and the other one was not. And in a drought, and you could see that the one that wasn't organic was all brown and the other one was still green. So it really shows that the crops get brown faster when they've been exposed to glyphosate.
I'm afraid that Professor Catherine Richardson, that I was having an honor to interview 2-3 years ago, she had told me that on Earth we have the most precious gift, which is life.
Yes, yes.
And this glyphosate looks like it's killing this gift that we have in plants and in people.
I agree. I actually do worry that we could potentially wipe out all life on Earth. I believe if we get to a point where climate change makes it impossible for us to live, right? And of course, all the damage to just the concept of this demonic molecule getting into all the proteins. It's not the sort of thing you can evolve your way out of. When it's all your proteins are affected, you can't sort of get rid of glycine in your proteins. It's not possible. It's too critical. And so there's no way that life can mutate its way out of this jam, I feel, as long as glyphosate's going to be around. So the only answer is to get rid of the glyphosate, which you could easily do, just shut down the factories and stop selling it. I'm hoping that I have some hope, both because people are eager to buy certified organic. More and more people are buying it, which is putting pressure on the farmers, number one. Number two, the farmers are becoming more aware that glyphosate could be hurting their health and their children's health. Number three, all these lawsuits. So the company is becoming concerned if there's too many lawsuits, it's not profitable to make the product. And then number four is even the people who distribute the product are starting to worry about lawsuits to them, to the store that's selling the glyphosate. So stores are starting to stop selling glyphosate, major stores. And so I think that's all good signs. And of course, all these lawsuits are making the company very, very nervous. So I think I'm hoping that I will see glyphosate disappear in my lifetime. And I don't think that's unrealistic.
So we should also put some pressure on politicians, right?
Well, absolutely. I am so frustrated with the politicians. It's been extremely painful to try to deal with them. It's just really, it's a thankless job, and you just get a lot of effort and you feel like they're not listening to you, and then nothing happens and you get very discouraged. In this country, it's extremely hard to fight politically. But the tide could change, if they can finally realize how important it is, enough politicians to start to raise red flags and really pressure, bring awareness. I mean, I think that as enough consumers speak out and say, I won't buy the food, eventually the government's going to hear it. I don't know what it takes to get past all the lobbying. I mean, the lobbying is just controlling them in this country, at least. Maybe in other countries it's easier to go the political route, but I am discouraged about the political route to success.
I would like, Stephanie, you to say a few sentences about yourself to our viewers. What do you do on a daily basis, and what is your education, and what you are doing right now?
Okay. So I'm MIT educated, completely MIT. I was graduate school. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from MIT, master's EE degree and PhD degree from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science. So most of my career, I was developing systems that allow people to communicate with computers using natural human language, precursors to things like Amazon Echo and Siri, the Siri iPhone. So we developed very early versions of those systems in my group. And I got concerned about autism, which was what got me off on this path. And so it was about maybe 2008 timeframe that I started to kind of shift over to doing research on correlating disease with toxic chemicals. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I spent 5 years, like 2007 to 2012, looking at chemicals that might be causing autism and feeling frustrated because I wasn't finding the answer. And that was when 2012 was when I heard Don Huber speak, and epiphany. I walked away and just dropped everything else and started just poring over all the literature on glyphosate, and then really reaching an understanding of how it took me another few years before I realized about the glycine analog. I knew it was a glycine analog, but I didn't know that it could get into proteins by mistake in place of glycine. That is really critical. And this is the thing I've been saying now for several years. And people are denying it. People are saying, no, it's not possible. But you read my book, because my book really gives details about the evidence that supports it. The evidence is quite strong. Even coming out of Monsanto's own early work, they basically showed that this is what's happening, and this is how it's disrupting the enzyme EPSP synthase in the plants. Very clear to me that that's how that's going. And so once you say it substitutes for glycine in that enzyme, and then you think about all the other enzymes that have glycines that are critical, it becomes, oh my God, it becomes really, really scary. And that was, when I just was really quite overwhelmed by the thought of how consequential that would be. And then how can we possibly, deal with this chemical? It's not possible, as I said, for life forms to I don't think, to be able to mutate to the point where they're not sensitive to glyphosate. All life, it kills all life through this mechanism, which is really, really demonic.
I wait for your book.
Thank you.
I can't wait. So they're very thankful for your time, for your knowledge, for your intention to share what you have found. And I hope to be able to talk to you again.
That would be delightful. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I appreciate your efforts to help to get the word out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you.